Wizard of Legend 2. I am a big fan of Wizard of Legend 1. I think Wizard of Legend 1 is one of the best simple hack and slash action roguelikes out there. And there's many reasons why I think the original did so well. Great gameplay, very simple, it doesn't take itself super seriously, and is very accessible. And when they announced the second game, I was very excited. Then the trailer dropped, and I definitely saw that people were, I wouldn't say concerned, but it looks very different visually than the first game. Now, different visuals and taking a different camera angle of a game, that's been done before. The best example being Risk of Rain. You know, Risk of Rain went from a 2D pixel-like action roguelike to a third-person action roguelike, and that's quite a jump. The gameplay still felt fairly similar, but still, it's quite different. Now, this didn't take as much of a huge change. It went from top-down to more of like a 3D top-down, like kind of 2.5D, however you want to call it. So it still looks quite visually different, but gameplay-wise, it should still be the same, right? Well, let's talk about all of this. First, let's talk about visuals and audio. And even in that regard, there's quite a lot to go through. So, first off, I think the new angle they took for the visuals is great. I personally love how it looks. I mean, even if you just look like at the hub area, the way the lines are, it almost feels like hand-drawn, but that's only when something is far away. There's a really good sense of depth in a lot of areas. It feels really awesome. I mean, this entire area here is just beautiful. I mean, the lighting, everything is great. So I love that. Now, some people might not. That's totally fair. I think it's just purely a difference in taste. But I do think visuals are great. Let's talk audio. So the original soundtrack of the game is fantastic. Oh my gosh. It is so good. It's one of my favorite soundtracks from action roguelike. It's a mixture of orchestral music with a bit of like video gamey sounds here and there, but nothing too 8-bitty. It really is a pretty serious sounding soundtrack. And to my understanding, we actually tried to look this up and I couldn't really find it, but I don't think they went with the original composer, which I was kind of surprised personally, because I thought the music was fantastic. And in this iteration, the music is good. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the music's bad. I'm just a little disappointed that it doesn't have the same touch that it did in the original. I think the original was just so fantastic. So I was a little disappointed to see that it went from a different angle. But nevertheless, sound design is great, and visual effects are fantastic. I think the visual effects in this game are great. When you actually start attacking and you hit anything, the numbers look great. The sound effects are awesome. It feels good to hit enemies. Overall, I think the effects combined with the sound design, I think make the action really satisfying, which is very important for a game like this. So props to that. Now, let's talk about vibe. All right, so one of the first major differences is the overall tone of the game took a massive left turn here. In this game, we have voice acting. We also have full-fledged characters with their names, and they have conversation, they have lore and stuff like that. They went with a much closer approach to Hades, where you have voice acting, you have unique art, and I personally find that very disappointing for a few reasons. First of all, I think the original game, what they did really well was that it didn't take itself too seriously, and it didn't try to make characters super important. It was just kind of fast-paced. It was just fun. You just saw little characters here and there. They just had like little emotes, and that was about it. I feel like the voice acting just tries to create this bigger feel to the game that is not necessary, and that to me does not fit the original feel of Wizard of Legend. I don't really see why they went for a Hades approach. Now, I understand why a lot of games do in general, right? Like Hades did very well, and I think the way like Hades approaches different characters and lore and everything is fantastic. and is one of the reasons why it did so well. And so I can imagine a lot of developers wanting to do something similar to a game that worked well. The difference here is that Wizard of Legend 1 had a unique vibe to it. It doesn't mean that you can't do a Hades-like. It's just I don't understand why this game decided to try to take a very trendy approach when the original game was more unique. And they had the potential of utilizing that uniqueness from the start instead of going for something that is trendy. I think the original game had such a very specific vibe that was so iconic and so memorable that I just found it very disappointing that they decided to go to put characters with voice acting, which doesn't really add anything. There's no inherent lore to this game. They don't put much effort into the story. They just decided to put voice acting. If you're not gonna have a big story with a full thing, I don't understand why you would have voice acting. That's just me potentially, but I am quite disappointed as a big Wizard of Legend fan. Now, let's actually talk about this voice acting a little bit. So once again, I work in the voice acting industry professionally. I am one of Capcom's lead engineer for voice actors for a lot of their recent popular games, and I'm also a voice actor myself, so I do know what a good quality voice acting is. And I will say I don't think the voice acting is particularly great from a directing standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, and from even a performance standpoint. But that could usually be contributed to directing. There's one particular character in this game that has a terrible effect on it, whether it was a terrible production effect or just recorded very terribly. For me, it just sounds like it wasn't recorded correctly. It just really does not sound good, even for someone who's not in the industry. I really think anyone who listens to the voice of the Lightning character, it just sounds really unprofessional. I'm very surprised. But a lot of the voice acting in general takes itself super seriously and just doesn't seem to fit and is unnecessary and is long. And if you're going to put voice acting and you're going to have a character that talks before you get to the particular window you're trying to get to when you talk to a merchant and everything, that loses time. Now, for a lot of games, that doesn't matter. But Wizard of Legend, the iconic aspect of Wizard of Legend is how fast-paced the game is. And I think it does actually slow down a lot of the gameplay, and overall the pacing gets slowed down quite a bit by having voice acting, which again, I just don't think fits. Now, all of these things aren't inherently oh, this is an issue, right? Some people might not be too against that whole side of it. I tried to not look at any reviews or anybody talk about the game before I played it extensively. So I've only just recently saw what some people have been saying. It does seem like one of the biggest complaints I've been seeing is the voice acting. It seems like people are not super into it. And that's a bit unfortunate because differently than gameplay changes, scrapping voice acting or just changing voice acting, that's more complicated. That's a lot to change. If you're going to scrap voice acting or just re-record stuff, that's different than balance issues, bugs, that kind of stuff. That's a bit unfortunate. I don't know what they're going to do, but it does seem like from what I've seen, the game does not have great reception on Steam, unfortunately, and it does seem like from what I've seen, a lot of people don't like the angle that they're going for with the voice acting, and that's a shame. That's quite a shame, I will say. I think better directing, better recording, and just overall not having to take itself too seriously from a story standpoint could potentially improve that. But again, that's a lot to ask for. That was already a lot without even getting into the gameplay, the roguelike elements, which of course there's plenty to talk about. But just to finish off on the visuals, there's also some cosmetic stuff. You can change your cloak, you can change the color, you can change the symbols. That's all cool. I mean, that's nice. It's a little detail. It's mostly for the online aspect, which I don't play currently. This game is trying to push online content, which will also be a topic of conversation. But sure, you can change your cloak, you can change the way you look. That's pretty cool. In previous games, the cloak would actually change some stats, and I've seen surprisingly a lot of people complaining on Steam that, oh, the cloak used to change your stats, but now it's just cosmetics, we wish it could do more. Actually, they just changed where that is. Instead of being the cloak, it's another aspect, which is like a pin. It does exactly the same thing as a cloak. So I don't think that's a problem at all. I think it's nice to just have cosmetics on the cloak and you just move the cloak's effects to another thing, which in this case is the talking mirror and like medallion stuff. It's exactly the same as cloaks. So I think that's totally fine. Okay, let's talk gameplay. I think they did a pretty good job with the core gameplay of the game. The original game, it felt really cool, felt really fast, it was very enjoyable, and they pretty much kept that pretty similarly to the first game. You still have, you know, your basic Arcana, your dash Arcana, your signature, your standard Arcana. All of these are the same, which I'm pretty happy with, personally. One of the major differences, I would say, from the first game to the second, and unfortunately that is a part that I'm not huge on, it's that overall, it's a little slower. And that makes sense with everything else in this game being slower. Unfortunately, to me, that does hinder the game. A lot of the Arcanas are slower. The overall feel is slower. It's just everything's a little slower. Which is, if it wasn't for the first game, I'd be like, oh, whatever. It's like a pretty decent game. But I know how the first game feels. And the first game is so much faster and so much more satisfying because you can just dash from one, do an Arcana, instantly switch to another Arcana, instantly do this. Here, it's like 70% of it. I wish it was even faster. But again, it makes sense with everything else being slower pace, you know, even just from the standpoint of like voice acting, all that good stuff. So gameplay-wise, yeah, I think it's okay. The different Arcanas, some feel good, some do not. Even in the first game, some Arcanas didn't feel as good as others. Here, even more so, unfortunately. I do think a lot of Arcanas feel pretty bad and don't feel very satisfying. Some individual Arcanas I have issues with. For instance, the Dragon Dive Arcana, if you hit a corner, it just feels so terrible. There are some Arcanas that just don't feel fantastic, unfortunately. But overall, I wish they felt a little better. Probably if it was faster, it would help. A good example, the Fueled Berserk. Now, I am a huge fan of a basic Arcana build from the first game. This is a perfect example of all I'm talking about from a gameplay standpoint. In the original game, there was an ability called Fueled Berserk. And what it does is you enter a fiery rage that speeds up basic Arcana. And that enables the basic Arcana build. It's one particular build you can do in the first game. I was very happy to see that, oh my gosh, they kept it for the second game. Super cool. The big difference is when you activate it in this game, there's an animation, a very, very, very short animation where the character goes, bah! And that animation takes like 0.2, 0.3 seconds of activation. And during that time, you can't use your basic attack. Now, just to a lot of people that might be like, oh, that's nothing. It's just 0.2 seconds. In a fast-paced game, that is a huge difference. In the original game, there wasn't any animation. You would click it, and the moment you activated the Arcana, you were instantly in that buff. But for some reason, they decided to add an animation to it, which now is slower and does not feel as satisfying. Why? I don't get it. I don't like playing with it as much as the first game, even though it was my favorite build in the first game. It feels terrible to go to the second game and see like my favorite ability, try it, and they added something unnecessary that just makes it worse. On top of that, a lot of the actual basic Arcanas that you use with it in the original game, for instance, you could just stay press on the button for the basic attack, and it would just do it automatically. And for some reason, more than half of the Arcanas in this game, you don't. So again, it's just, there's a lot of little details individually in all of these Arcanas that I wish were just polished differently. And I think what I've realized, all the things I'm saying about the visuals, about the gameplay, about all of the bugs and stuff that we're going to get to, it all feels as if this game, this sequel, was like developed by a team of fans of the original game, as opposed to being a team of like people that have developed the games a lot. I actually don't know the behind the scenes of what happened and the team involved, but it really does feel like there's a lot of issues in this game that are quite surprising to me. There's a lot of weird mistakes and weird things that for me, seemed obvious to not be in this early access. I'm a little surprised. It does feel like there are a lot of pretty simple mistakes that could be fixed, which again, this is an early access, so good. But I'm still kind of surprised because there's quite a few, which again, we haven't really talked about that yet. So let's talk about another aspect here. Let's talk about more of some of the roguelike elements. So in the original game, you had a bunch of arcanas, you had a bunch of items. Here they kept a lot of this stuff. You still have the different items you can find. You still are limited in your inventory space as how much you can have. You have different arcanas, each obviously unique. But they also decided to introduce a rogue-lite element with permanent progression, similar to Hades, to no surprise, where you can give yourself little buffs to start off with. So, for instance, Hearthstone of Healing, a sparkling gem infused with the essence of life. Increase maximum health by 140. Cool. And you can upgrade those 3 times by killing bosses. And so they have a roguelite element. It's a weird one to me. I mean, I like the idea that you can choose up to 3 of those, and the higher the difficulty, the least options you have, and the more you have to actually add negative runes, which are like higher difficulty scalings. It's a cool concept. I personally don't love the fact that the higher the difficulty, the more you have to get rid of bonuses. I'm not huge overall in any game. The higher difficulty makes you weaker. I would much rather have higher difficulties make things harder than getting rid of some of your benefits. I usually doesn't feel as great personally, but it depends. I mean, that's more my taste. The roguelike roguelite elements are fine. There's not much currently. I hope they add more because there's really a very, very limited amount of upgrades you can have. One thing that's kind of weird is that these are only unlocked after like 4 or 5 runs, which is weird because during your run, you do get the currency to get stronger, but you don't unlock the possibility of getting stronger until you've done multiple runs, which for roguelite, I find that to be a weird choice. That's not inherently a bad thing, I'd say, but it is kind of weird because I was getting all these orbs. I was saying, use those to improve your abilities. I'm like, cool. Where is that? And I was looking for it constantly after run after run after run. I was like, am I missing something? And then like, oh, then they got unlocked after like 4 or 5 runs and I could start with something better. I was like, okay, weird, but sure, why not? Let's talk about the hub world because, yeah, I mean, the roguelite elements on the hub world. There was the changing your medallion, which I think is cool. Then there are a few additional things. You know, they're trying to add more and more stuff to the hub. One of them is the task board clerk. There's a lot of games that do that kind of stuff where you have to do a certain amount of tasks while you're playing, and then you get rewards. You just try to reward the player for just playing the game. For instance, push 20 enemies into spikes, and if you do that, you get rewarded 30 gems. I will say the rewards are always pretty underwhelming, all things considered. I think they could definitely bump up some of those numbers, but that's besides the point. It's nice, you know, to have an extra little thing for just playing the game. I'm down for that. One thing I am not super down for, though, is to have some of these tasks, which again are on the same window as all the other tasks, be co-op exclusive. That, to me, is not something I'm super into. For instance, on the task board I currently have, it has push 20 enemies into spikes, and then it's like play with a friend. Then blah, 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 blah. Then like enhance the standard arcana 3 times, and then defeat Bahadur with a friend. First of all, there's no visual distinction. It just feels like it's as important as anything else to play with a friend. It's great that, you know, they're trying to push co-op, but to have it be part of the task board as a solo players, right? I'm not super into that. I think that doesn't give the right message. I would rather not have a reward that I can never get on my main task board because I just don't want to play co-op or I don't have a friend to play with. It would have been nice to potentially have it on a different window. This might be like a small little detail, but I think it is pretty important, all things considered. It can make someone feel like, oh, am I not playing this game correctly because my main tasks require me to play with multiplayer? And while we're at it, when you open certain menus in the hub world, there are certain NPCs you can talk to. Once again, we did talk about how I feel like when you talk to an NPC when you want to buy something. For instance, the arcane mentor, the first time you talk to them in the hub, they have a little speech, and then they get into the shop. For instance, here, if I talk to this lady, and then I press space, and then this pops up. Now, for some reason, a lot of these menu opening are slow. For instance, my inventory takes it takes about a second to open. All things considered, that might not seem like a big deal, but 1 second for a super fast action roguelike where you're constantly going to be looking at your inventory is really slow. And it's noticeably slow when you play. I want to look at my inventory. I just want to quickly just glance at something that I could do in 0.5 seconds if I'm used to it, which is going to triple the time because the inventory speed has a whole animation that is just unnecessary once again. I don't care about a fancy animation. I would rather just see the information quickly for a game that is fast-paced. Again, it does seem like I'm going through very, very specific nitpicky things, but I think this is an opportunity to really show how important certain little details are for a game that already has a dedicated fan base with a very specific vibe. So I don't care. I'm just gonna talk about all the little things that I think are interesting to look at. Another very annoying thing I've noticed, this is just a bug, but I'm surprised it has not been fixed even in this current iteration of the early access game, is viewers cannot see this, but when you open a menu and then you try to move away, during the animation of closing that window, you might realize that if I press left, it takes a second before my character starts moving. That's fine. I still think I would rather not have it be like that long. But more importantly, if I press this and I press A and S to go like bottom right, it doesn't do that. It just goes left. I'm currently pressing down. During animation, the game does not actually input buffer certain buttons, which again is just a very basic mistake. Now that might seem like a small detail. It is not a small detail. I've actually taken a lot of damage fairly often to this actual issue because there's a lot of NPCs you talk to very quickly, and then you're trying to leave and you're trying to go down and you just can't go down because you're pressing 2 buttons at the same time, and then you try to dash. I'm trying to press here right now. I'm pressing left. I'm just pressing left right now and it's not going left. I've legitimately taken a lot of damage from this kind of issue. These are once again issues that can be fixed, but I've never really seen any early access game of a franchise that is quite popular have these glaring bugs and issues in the early access, which you still have to pay for, right? If it's for an open beta, that's understandable, but for an early access, I'm very surprised this is in there. That's just, I can't believe that it does not register my button inputs if I'm during an opening animation of any NPC in the game, including when you teleport into a new area. So if I teleport into a new area and I try to press up and left, it's just going to go up. And then if I try to dash, trying to go up and left dashing, it's just going to go dashing up, and I might hit a trap. And that's how I've been taking a lot of damage for this mistake. These kind of little details I think are very important to bring up. Let's talk about the actual run itself, right? So one big difference they went for this time around, and I think one of the major reasons why people have been saying that this is kind of like a Hades-like now, outside of the voice acting and taking itself more seriously with the characters, is the actual biomes and the actual world. So in the first game, you would start a run, you would randomly be placed in one of the possible elemental stages. You could start on the earth stage, you could start on the wind stage, and at the end of that particular elemental stage, you fight that elemental boss. Simple. Very recognizable system, which I'm very sad they didn't keep that. I really feel like that was really part of the core identity of this game. Instead, they decided to go for more of a Hades approach, where now it's always the same biomes and it's just random stuff. You always start in the forest area, then you go into a desert, then you get into like a castle. I don't really see the correlation with Wizard of Legend personally. That's a bit sad to me. I think once again they had a really perfect template for something very unique by utilizing what the first game did, which is huge stages with like a very specific element that is just random every single time. I thought that was awesome from the first game, but I guess they didn't stick with it, which is a bit sad. But in any case, that does mean one very important thing, which is that what about the elemental bosses, right? Because obviously they can't scrap that. That's honestly like the entire identity of Wizard of Legend. So what they did is that you still have the elemental bosses, but they're just halfway through any of the biomes randomly. It feels very disconnected. It feels like it was just kind of thrown in there. So halfway through the desert biome, you might fight the lightning guy. And then once you fight the lightning guy, you're back to the desert biome. It's kind of weird. I personally don't love that. I kind of wish they just stuck with the original theme. But otherwise, at the end of the actual biome, you do fight a boss. A predetermined boss. It's always the same boss, similar to Hades. They're just random creatures. The first boss is like a little girl and a big ogre. The second boss is some sandwich, and the third sandwich, and the third boss is a queen and a king. Okay, sure. You know, just very Hades-like in the way where it's just a different biome with specific bosses. And again, for me, that doesn't feel like Wizard of Legend personally, but that's how it is. Now, the boss design itself is, I think, hit or miss. Some of them are really cool. I actually really like the first boss, the little girl and the ogre. I think once you know the moveset, it's pretty easy, but it feels good to evade all the attacks, and it's not a super easy fight, but it feels pretty fair. It does feel like a lot of bosses, you do have to learn the moveset. Unfortunately, some attacks just kind of happen instantly, and if you just don't know it by heart, you're almost always going to take damage the first time. I'm not a fan of that myself, and I do think some attacks, you can very clearly understand what they're going to do, even if you don't understand it. A lot of games, obviously, if you know the moveset, you're going to do much better. But in this game, I feel like there's too many attacks where if you don't know the attack pattern super well, you might just lose your entire run to it. It doesn't feel great. But some attack patterns are really cool, really original. The Queen and King phase transition, where there's like all these pieces that fall from the sky and they create like ripple effects that you can really kind of predict and move around. They're awesome, super cool design. They last way too long in my opinion, but they're really cool. I think the bosses in general, they're cool. There are a few issues with them. Some attacks are multi-hit, where the game doesn't really have like iframes clearly. Similar to the first game, by the way, which is fine. You know, there's some attacks where one attack is going to deal like 40 damage, while another attack might deal like 10 damage 5 times in a row, right? Or a big boom, right? And when you would say, okay, well, if I get hit by either of these attacks, that's the same amount of damage. Unfortunately, there are some attacks in this game where the multi-hit is just so extremely fast that you can lose half of your health bar within like a second just because you got hit by one attack, while a big attack only deals 40 damage, doesn't feel as punishing. So some attacks just feel a little unbalanced, don't feel as great to get hit by. That's depending on the boss. Another aspect of the bosses, there's a lot of missing sound effects, which can feel pretty awkward. There's entire like attacks that just don't have any sounds, which is weird. Still another detail, but there's just a lot of details that are missing. I'm quite surprised by. In any case, I think the bosses are hit or miss. Some are cool, others are okay, but I think a lot of them can easily be, adjusted to be really enjoyable experiences. So in that regard, I think they did a decent job, all things considered. Let's talk about quality of life stuff. I think the game does struggle quite a bit with a lot of quality of life aspects. There's a lot of random examples I could be talking about. Just so many little details that I just think could be different, and I'm just kind of surprised have not already been included. There's information that is very confusing. For instance, when you're trying to enchant an Arcana, we're like, oh, you can get like a 10% crit chance increase. But if you're going to enchant it again, it doesn't tell you that it's going to replace the previous numbers. You know, it's just visually, a lot of things are very confusing. It's very hard to know which of the Arcanas they are. For instance, I don't know which Arcana is a basic Arcana versus a standard Arcana. Yes, once you know. Visually, the commons are more brown. The signature are more this. They have a little gold thing. Yes, the first game also did struggle with that, by the way, and I didn't really like it in the first game. But theoretically, a sequel is supposed to improve on certain aspects. I'm just kind of disappointed that this was not improved. It's very hard to know what is a basic Arcana and what isn't. After a while, you do really visually get it. but I bring this up because I've had 2 runs where I switched an Arcana. I bought an Arcana thinking it was like an additional Arcana. Ended up being another basic, which replaced mine, and I was really bummed, and it kind of screwed my run because I spent all my money on it. So certain quality of life improvements. I do love that there's stats now in the inventory. That was not the case in the first game. I think that's awesome. Super down for that. That's super cool. Unfortunately, it does not track things as you are in the inventory page. What I mean by that is that if you do get rid of an item in your inventory that changes your stats, getting rid of that item is not going to actually change that number on the spot. You have to leave the inventory, go back on it, that kind of stuff. So small little quality of life things. Another huge one is the map. In the first game, when you would open the map, you would see it overlaid on the screen, and you can move around while you have it open. For some reason, in this game, you can't. You can only open the map, even though you still see the overlay. You can't move. I don't know why. Everybody loved that feature. They got rid of it. I'm assuming they're going to bring it back. Another aspect is you can use one button to open the map, but you have to press escape to then get rid of the map, which also was not a thing in the first game. There's just so many weird decisions that were made in this game. I don't get it. So instead of just being able to walk around, press a button while you're moving, and then press it again after like a half a second to get, oh yeah, I'm over there. Here, you have to walk around, press a button, stop moving, then press escape and start moving again. And don't forget that when you do move out of a window, sometimes it does not register certain movements. So it just makes things so much slower. So just weird quality of life changes from the first game that nobody asked for that was included in here. And I could go on and on and on a lot of quality of life stuff. That, I think, is a pretty major aspect, which, again, all of these can be improved. I just wish they already were for most of them, knowing that this is in early access and not beta, because a lot of these quality of life changes should be pretty obvious, in my opinion. For instance, another thing is information given to players can be a little confusing as well. Some of them are simple, like receive 12% less damage. Got that. Yeah, that makes sense. Others are more like each summon adds damage. You're like, okay, well, what are summons? And then you look at one of your Arcanas and you're like, oh, this Arcana has the summon tag. So you're like, cool, so each of my summoned Arcanas gives me damage. No, that's not the case. It's actually each item that summons a little creature next to you will give you damage. Except that these items don't even have the word summon in it. So some spells will have the word summon. They don't work with an item that says that each summon gives you damage. And there's items that are like, oh, now you have a hand that follows you around and attacks enemies. That's considered a summon. This kind of information, I think there's a lot of items and spells that do have this issue where they just give confusing information. Once again, this could easily be changed, and I do hope that it's going to be a little bit more clear as to what certain items do. Another example, there's an item that says, double all damage from items that boost damage. And you're like, okay, got it. So anything that says like, oh, 15% more damage, that's going to be 30% damage. Except that for some reason, I had a cursed item that says you deal more damage when you do something, and that doesn't trigger it. Okay, that's a shame. Just doesn't work. I feel like a lot of things should synergize in this game, but just don't currently, and that's a bit of a disappointment, because I've gotten a lot of situations where I'm like, ooh, an item. Oh, wait a minute, this could work with what I have, and actually it doesn't. So, a little disappointing. I gotta say, I do feel bad. I usually don't spend this much time saying so many negative aspects in a Rogathon. I really do feel bad about it, but I do have to really emphasize how important the first game is to me, and how usually I don't play a lot of Rogathons that don't do super well or that are controversial. I play a lot of, games that have very positive feedback. This is one of the first games that I've played that does not have the best feedback currently. And the reason I'm doing this is because I really do want to emphasize that I do think this game has potential. And I do think that this game could be a really good sequel. I really do believe that. I think a lot of people don't have that mindset. And I think I want to bring up all the things I have trouble with, because I want this stuff to be improved. And I want to, show what I think should have been done different and what can be done different, in hopes that this can really be a good sequel to one of my favorite action roguelikes in the last few years. If you look at Steam reviews, you're going to have the big stuff. You're going to have I don't like the voice acting. I don't like the Hades-like approach. That's it. And these are some of the most important aspects. Absolutely. But you don't get to see many people talking about details. Details that for some may seem small, but to others, actually, with so many of them bundled up together, just really does hinder the gameplay massively, much more than most people would realize, in my opinion. I think a lot of these tiny details, all bundled up, make me not want to continue playing the game. If they fixed most of the quality of life issues that I have, if they changed the way that, some of the bosses interact, if they had more sound effects, if the voice acting was different, if everything was faster, all of these are details. But if all those were fixed, I actually think I would really enjoy this game. Because once again, let's not forget, I think the core gameplay is fantastic. It feels great to hit enemies and to use spells. There is a game here. There is a game. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, in my opinion. But I do think, as a whole, this can work. They just need to do a lot of improvements, in my opinion. And a lot of these improvements, unfortunately, should have been done earlier. This, to me, should not have been released in its current state. But there's a lot of time to improve, and games like Hades, really did take the early access stuff very seriously and did benefit from all the feedback in order to create one of the best action roguelikes out there. So this is my hope for this game. That's most of what I want to talk about. There's a few more details that I could just bring up. Some spell upgrades feel worse than the original. There's a cool system where you can upgrade your spells after you kill an elemental boss. That's really cool. I love the design of that, but for some reason, a lot of them slow down the spell, which makes it not as satisfying, in my opinion. Some of them don't, right? But I feel like 2 or 3, the upgraded version was just a lesser version of the original, which didn't feel great. Also, some spells can have multiple variations, others can't. That information is confusing. I'm willing to bet they're going to add more of that. Obviously, I didn't talk about, content-wise. There's not as much content as I wish there would have, but that's going to be added later on for sure. The original game had a ton of Arcanas, and I know they're going to have even more Arcanas. Currently, there's only 10 basic Arcanas. There's only 15 dash Arcanas. There's only 10 signature Arcanas, which is pretty small, all things considered, in comparison to the original. Obviously, they're going to add some more. I think for an early access, that's still a little lower than I would have expected, but it's fine. I do miss not having the little mini boss when you go to a different area. I really did like that. I thought that was really cool, and they don't have that anymore. That's a bit of a shame. That's just taste. A bit of a bigger detail here that I forgot to bring up is you don't really get much for killing a boss. Like the Elementalist, you do get the upgraded version of an Arcana, but when you kill a boss, you don't really get anything. Similar to Hades. In Hades, it works, but here I don't think it really works. I do miss not getting rewarded for killing a boss. And I think one of the coolest features of the original game was when you would kill a boss, you would get a new Arcana. And therefore, you would try out so many Arcanas. But in this version of the game, getting a new Arcana is much, much, much harder. Most of the time, if I don't buy an Arcana, I will never be offered a different Arcana the entire run. I find that to be very disappointing because I think the original game kind of forced you to play with a bunch of Arcanas because they would give you a bunch of free upgraded Arcanas after you beat a boss. So you would try out so many of them. While here, I've gone an entire run without changing a single Arcana because I was just never offered one. So I really do wish that every time you beat a boss, just like the original, you get a new Arcana. You can try new ones. I don't know why that was also scrapped from the original. Instead, you just get a currency for the hub, which again is not super satisfying, especially since a lot of the currencies in the hub don't do as much as a game like Hades. A lot of the things you can unlock in the hub don't really do too much. If they wanted to go for a Hades approach, I feel like they're missing quite a few things that Hades had. that really felt rewarding when you get currency. Here, not so much in my opinion. One of the currencies you get for killing a major boss is you get an eye of whatever, which the only purpose, to my understanding so far, is to unlock negative runes, which are runes you can add to difficulty to make the game harder. That is the only benefit you get for killing a major boss, which just seems a bit too small for me and very situational. I wish there was more reward for killing bosses and more opportunities to try out new Arcanas, because the point of the original game is that you would cycle through so many Arcanas so fast. So I do hope they bring that back. I think that's an easy thing to bring back and to implement in this version. Another small detail, no pause menu. I don't know why. When you pause the game, there's no music. It's just complete silence. That's a bit disappointing. Small thing. That's more on my end. But yeah, you know what? I think that's enough little details. I feel bad for talking all these negative things about one of my favorite games out there. Really, really loved the original game. It was one of my favorite action roguelikes, hack and slash, very fast paced. I think Wizard of Legend 2 can be a good game. And hopefully there will be enough feedback for the developers to take it all in and to eventually just create something that we can all love and enjoy. I don't think this is a impossible task. I do think a lot of people currently are very discouraged by it, but I actually have hope that a lot of this stuff can change for the better. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm a little disappointed that this was released in early access in its current state for a game that is so important to me and to many people. Hopefully we will have a really decent and fun Wizard of Legend 2.